Okay, let's rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome to tonight's meeting. I'm looking for approval of today's agenda.
So moved.
And a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, the same. Okay. Agenda set. Number 3, study session, distance learning survey, John Double.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me up today. With our Distance Learning Academy, what we did is halfway through the first quarter, we had a survey to find out what the parent perceptions were on how things were going. Slide, please. So when we broke it down from the responses we got, we had 177 surveys returned, and you can see how that broke down at the different levels between elementary, middle school, and high school. The next question we looked at finding out is what did they feel their support was like going into the academy or for their experience thus far. Overall results were the 77.4%. It did break down. You can see elementary was up a little closer to almost 90, where the middle school, high school, secondary range were in there at about 70. When you look at the bottom of the slide, I put in the results from last spring, just to kind of see how, for comparison, how the support was feeling at that time. And as a good starting point for us, we'll make these better as we move along through the year. Next slide. Communication was another piece that we were wondering about, and just what were parents feeling was the communication that they were getting from our staff. Just right is that nice target in the middle, and that was at 78.5% overall in the surveys, and you can see it was fairly consistent across all 3 levels. We did have some that felt there was a little bit too much, but invariably people felt that we needed a little bit more, and so that's something we'll be working on as we go forward now. Next slide. Engagement is always something we're looking at for in our classrooms. Are they engaged with our Google Meets in particular, as that's our face-to-face contact time? Overall, we were at almost 71%, but you can see that was a little higher at the elementary and middle school than at our high school level. So again, that's something we're taking a look at to see how we can improve that engagement, to get them at more of those Google Meets and engaged in them, not just watching them like a video. Coursework, again, something we wonder, how's their homework going? This one here, you can see that the numbers balanced out pretty well when it came to the overall results, but as you look through, the elementary school you'll see is a little bit toward the lighter end, not by much, but a little bit. In the high school, secondary being a little bit toward the heavier of the 2 to 3 hours or 2 or more hours. That's something you'd expect with the learning models that they're in. We're of course looking at the opposite corners to find out, is there enough of the homework going on that they're doing outside of the Google Meets? Again, this was questioned outside of the time that they're in the Google Meet, is how much time they're spending on this, not just homework in general.
What percentage of time do they spend on Google Meet? Any idea?
The middle school and high school classes, their Google Meets occur during their shortened day. The elementary, they're scheduled throughout the day, so they may have a couple in the morning and a couple in the afternoon. They're not running the full entire time, but they are having different sessions for different topic areas.
Okay.
Support at home, this was a question that we put in there to find out how parents were feeling about the support level they were having to give their students at home in this environment. The just right mode in the middle, that's where we're targeting, trying to get in there. We had about 75% of the families feel that it was a just right as far as the balance for the help that they were having to give at home. Some felt it was a little bit much, some felt they weren't having to give enough. We always encourage more, of course, when it's coming to extra support for our students, but we'll be taking a look at that as well. We asked the question that when you take a look at areas that we could improve in supporting the students, where could we take a look at doing some of those things? The 5 areas that we asked about were technology, academics, mental health, special needs, and our English language or multi-language learners. Again, taking that and breaking it down into the schools, you can see the overall results. We had parents taking a look at more of the academic time, or academic support was a big one that came up. And then, of course, technology. The technology ones we were seeing, not understanding necessarily how the iPad works versus a Chromebook. When can they get that help, getting logged in, the different pieces as far as the programs go. Academics, we had some requests even for tutors in chemistry, calculus, those types of classes when they're up at those upper ends. But also just trying to get more time with the staff members.
So, John, I don't know if
Yes.
you have an answer to this or if you know this information, but what % of your students are special needs and what % of your students are EL learners?
I do not know those numbers offhand.
Okay, I'd be just curious to see how those percentages align to the percentages of the students.
We did ask for comments at the end, just kind of left it open as far as what other ways could we do things a little differently to improve. The comments that have the E with them, that's the elementary level. Would anybody like a little more time? Okay, another one with elementary. We have our first one with the middle school. And then our 2 with the high school. Overall, out of the 177 surveys, we had 80 different comments that came in, and these were just a sampling of those comments at the different levels. When we look to move forward on all these things, communication is, of course, one of the big areas we want to work on, as that's really tough when we're at a distance, and so we need to make those extra efforts. We're working with the staff to examine the ways to increase not only the quantity, but the quality of those communications that they're going home. A place we're going to be starting with that is right in with our conferences that are coming up right now, or this week and next week with the middle school. Elementary is right after the long weekend, and so we'll be connecting with the families on how's the best way to reach out to them, making sure that we have that information so that we can communicate with them more effectively. Increasing our support to the students, working with our teachers and our tech support to resolve any of the submission issues. We've had a couple of reports where a student has submitted something online and maybe it didn't get all the way to the teacher, finding out where that was it done correctly. Expanding our technology hours for the support desk, collaborating with our staff to find new and improved ways to provide additional support to the families as well. And then engagement, always working on that engagement to keep them in their classes and learning, continuing to find ways to increase that. How can we do that? What's going to help us the best? Any questions?
So 177 surveys were out of how many students altogether?
A little over 750.
How many families do we know?
I do not know. I know there were some families that had 3 or 4 students in
Right.
the academy.
Okay, maybe you could just be your Mary Jo that information. I can share that with the board in an update or something.
And, but, I mean, the surveys, that wasn't per family, right? It was per student? Is
We
that how
asked
you
for it
count?
by student, but there were some that probably completed it by family.
Okay, so when you break it out then into elementary, high school, how do you do that if it's a family survey?
We went by what they entered on the survey,
Okay,
because it was asked, what student level are you submitting the survey for? And that's when they
Oh.
selected elementary, middle, or high school.
so
But they may
might,
have opted to only do one level instead of doing all three.
or they might have had 2 elementary students and done it, okay.
Yes.
Trying to think where some other questions were along the way. So I noticed one of the comments had to do with just navigating technology to find out where the assignments were, et cetera. And I know even in college, in online classes, consistency in layout is, and just the navigation is half of the problem. So in our presentation to the families, are across classes, grades, subjects, are they pretty consistent in where you find this or that or the other thing?
We're working to improve that consistency to make sure that it's more, better aligned for the students and the families to know where that stuff goes. That way they know that this is where all the assignments get turned in, here's where our attendance questions go, so that way there's a streamlined across everyone at
Okay.
a certain level.
And then the one about the hours, how much time are you putting in when you're not in Google Meets? That was kind of spread across the board, but what would, on the other ones, you had kind of a just right area. What would we say as a district would be the just right amount for the average student to be spending outside of Google Meets for good academic gain?
That's different for every learner. I know when I was in school, I was one of those that would have been in the less than an hour category, but I also know my younger brothers, who both make a whole lot more than I do right now, spend a lot more time on their homework. So I don't know if that correlates.
Yeah.
But every learner's a little bit different in the amount of time. When you're looking at the secondary level, with the shortened classes, a lot more of that work is pushed to the home. So for the hours that they last year they would have been in school, that's kind of a looking for that amount of time to go home. So probably about 25 to 30 minutes per class they have. With 6 classes, that's 2 to 3 hours worth of homework. So is that hitting the mark at the secondary level? Not that it's a required amount of homework, it's more work outside of the class hour.
Okay. Could you go back to the one about the time spent outside? Okay, yeah. Just wondering from what you said, and their high school does have a larger amount that is 2 to more hours, okay. And then, what was my other question? It'll come back to me. I'll pass for now, thanks.
I was just wondering, from a communication standpoint, how much is technology playing into that if they don't feel they're getting enough? Are we finding that most of the students are getting enough access to the internet, the Wi-Fi now, or are we still seeing some issues out there connecting there with hotspots or whatever?
There's an occasional issue, but for the most part, our students all have the access that they need. The communication piece in in some of the cases when we started out the year, were missing pieces like a parent email. So was the parent getting the email if it wasn't in the system? Those types of pieces that we've helped fill in a lot of those holes as the quarter's gone on. So that's helped in reaching out as well.
What happens in the situations or scenarios where the parents don't have an email? Do we have a workaround on that, or are there a lot of parents that don't?
If we find those folks, we try to help them out the best we can, and we will communicate with them in other ways, whether it's sending something home or.
There's nothing better than a phone call. We can have all this technology in the world, but I still think the best way to connect is, hey, we're not seeing your kid, or they're not doing their work. Call and talk to mom or dad or whoever on the phone.
And this is actually the slide that had my other question on it. So it appears that the academic category is where most of the desired support is. And I know on the other slide it asked about how much communication information are you given, and it seemed to be just right, but still they're wanting more academic support. So how, other than, I know your, the other slide said providing technology support, et cetera, how are we able to provide for high school, for example, over half of the responding surveys want more academic support and almost half in the others? How can we, as a district, supply that? Would it be more time face-to-face in a Google Meet? Would it be more communication with instructors? Do you have any ideas about that?
Some things that we are looking at is how are we better using those office hours that the staff have at that high school level, but also the idea of what other things can we do to help connect. Not all of those students, they could check as many of the boxes as they'd liked. There are some families that checked all 5. So is that something where that was also someone who's listed as needing more special needs support as well? So different ways that we're looking at that data as we continue to break it down to figure out where's the best way to get us that additional time they need to feel supported better academically.
When are you planning your next survey, if you are?
Personally, I would be looking to do these in the middle of each quarter, kind of give us a guide.
Just a couple comments that I have from looking at the, the information that's been provided. I think we made progress, between last spring and now. And so that's great to see. You're also analyzing where you're at today and looking at making it better and better and better. And I commend you for that. You're not complacent and just saying this is what we got, and so it's good to see this survey and good to see that we're focused on making improvements on the program. So that's great.
How many academic staff are there, John, that work with the kids?
Roughly, I'd throw the number around 40,
Okay.
but I believe it could be a little higher. We have a lot of shared staff when it comes to the high school level.
Okay. Yeah, Neil.
John, I'm still not exactly clear about the 177. Was this survey available to anyone, or did we somehow select respondees? How did we arrive at 177 responses?
We sent out surveys to every family in the DLA, and these are the ones that replied back.
Okay, so then that 177 is a result of those that actually took the initiative or had the wherewithal to respond then?
Yes.
So that might involve a factor that would skew the results. Have we thought about that? I mean, the first thing that pops into my mind is that most likely the 177 who responded were people who either had no problem with distance learning or who had the wherewithal to have the resources to do it, the equipment at home to do it, and were probably of a background that's academic in the first place. I'm just wondering, have you considered that these results might be skewed and look a little better? I mean, it would work really well for the students that do very well in school. And I'm kind of suspecting that those that don't do real well in school are probably the ones that didn't respond.
We never know what the results are that we're going to get back. I agree that they could be skewed, but they could be skewed either direction. We had a lot of that responses that gave no additional comments. Doesn't mean they didn't have a comment or they just didn't put one in. So I agree that they could be skewed, but we don't know exactly how that would look.
Yeah, and a kind of a follow-up to that to my comment is that I would strongly suspect that probably the students that do well in school are the ones that do well with distance learning, and the students that struggle in school struggle with distant learning. So it's always a problem. It's not just a new problem because we are always struggling with students that have problems either with our system or with they have other issues that create problems. But the problems are not going to go away. what I think we need to behooves us to do is to identify the difficulties that are specifically related to distance learning, and boy, that's a tough one to figure out.
And what are the plans for addressing the mental health support?
We are currently working with the counselors and social workers at each of the levels. Elementary, they're coming in and they're doing the second step program with our students as well. They're available in case there's students that need assistance in a one-on-one setting. So our teachers are kind of the frontline folks there, where they're identifying if a student comes and asks for assistance, we have a counselor assigned for that grade level so that they can get somebody to contact with them. And at the high school level, they're all tied to their building counselor already for their schedules and everything else.
And I would assume it would be easier for a student to ask for help in person when they're in class. So what does that gateway look for them to be when they're distance learning? Are there any roadblocks in their way of accessing that mental health aspect or asking for help, or how would they let their teacher know that they're struggling with mental health needs?
Some of our students choose to stay on the Google Meets a little bit longer. That way, once the majority of the class has gone off to the wayside, just like a student would stay after class, we don't have necessarily a hallway for them to run into each other, but and some will show up early as well. They also have times that they can set up during those office hours to try to connect with the teachers, and if there's no one else in the room, that gives them that opportunity.
And is it something that's actually addressed, you know, if you're feeling this way, or if you want to talk to us about how you're feeling, talk to me, or do they actually have that kind of conversation?
I'd have to check into the specifics of the conversation, but I know they do check on the students to make sure they're doing okay and let us know if there's anyone that's needing more assistance.
So John, when you get the numbers and share them for the special ed and English language learners, can you break it down in two parts? How many responded, of those students that responded? If it doesn't identify them, you know, will that work?
We won't know.
Okay,
It was
all
an
right.
anonymous survey.
Because I'm just curious, I think that, again, this skews the numbers. That's why I'm like, you know, you can say how many are in distance learning, and that's what you're going to find out from us. We have no idea if they were part of the 177, right?
Right, yeah.
8% of our students are EL in distance learning, 8%. 8%? Mm-hmm. Anything else? John, thanks for working with this and taking it at the last minute and continuing to get better.
No problem. Thank you very much.
All right, referendum presentation, Jennifer and Dr. Funk.
So Jennifer and I have been kind of going around the district talking to different folks, and we thought we would share with the board the presentation that we've been conducting so that you're aware of what it looks like. I can tell you this week we're pretty light for presentations, but next Monday, I believe that I've got 2 PTO presentations, like at 5 and 5:30, and then we're going up to Clark's Grove. If anyone wants to come up to Clark's Grove, and we'll be talking to the city council up there and doing a presentation up in Clark's Grove. And then I'm at noon Kiwanis on Friday as well, on Monday as well at the Legion. Clark's Grove is Monday. So if you can just let Ashley know so we don't have more than 4 board members there, that would be a good thing. So real quick, here's kind of what we run through. A lot of this is going to be very familiar to the board. Go ahead, Ashley. So Jennifer, why don't you come on up and talk through this slide, or the next few slides, actually.
Okay, so I know a lot of you have seen this slide. Really what it shows is, you know, the Gen Ed formula, which is what we get from the state per pupil, and it's the largest single contributor to our revenue. Starting in 2003, if you use that at the base here, the blue line shows where that per pupil amount would have gone if we had simply gotten a adjustment for inflation. So we would be at 7,070 this year. In contrast, the dashed line is where the formula has gone. You can see there's at least a couple of spots in there where the formula remained flat over the course of 2 years. They're in the very beginning and about a third of the way through. That difference here this year represents over $3.5 million worth of revenue to the school district. Go on, Ashley. So this is where we are compared to the other Big 9 districts with regard to our referendum, which is also expressed in a per pupil amount. We're currently at 574. If we are successful in our ballot question, that will increase to 715. You can see Austin also has a green column. Our ask is for about $141 additional per pupil unit. Austin has a question on the ballot asking for an additional $505. And Owatonna has a question asking over the course of a couple of years of an additional $600. We would still be in the lower third, even if we pass. This graph shows, what's our district look like the last few years? Revenues compared to expenditures, and then the gray bar is our fund balance. As I've said in all of our presentations, I've only been here a little over a year, but looking at this and everything I look at, it's very evident that Albert Lee Schools has done a great job financially and has been outstanding stewards of our taxpayers' money.
So people often say, okay, you've done a nice job fiscally. Well, what have you done to improve the school district? And this slide just demonstrates a few of the things. One of the things that we don't see is the HVAC systems that we put in like 2013 to 16. We were able to time those right so that there was no spike in increased taxes for the taxpayers. And we were able, because of our free and reduced count in the district, to utilize zero interest bonds, which saved taxpayers $3.383 million. You're well aware of the technology upgrades we've done, and of course the Hammer project in Halverson. You saw this slide last week. That's the difference between 2014 and 2020. Difference is $8 on a $100,000 home, which is about the average price in the community. So why are we going out and why now? Our current levy is expiring next year in 2022, so we're going to go out a year early in case it doesn't pass this fall. So we would have one more opportunity to get the levy passed. And the other piece of it is, as this group in particular is well aware, we have a significant investment in technology, and we are really utilizing the technology more than we ever imagined as related to this pandemic. And we're going to need an investment to continue to provide technology at the level we're providing. So, and the other thing for people to know is that, we are not just asking for more money. We have made some adjustments to the budget, and this past year we eliminated $763,000 from the budget. And most of my time here, we've had a slight increase in enrollment. We're looking at a flat or slightly declining enrollment, which would mean potential less revenue even if the referendum passes. There's our current educational model with devices. There's our replacement plan. Actually, that 2021, we have 1,100 new Chromebooks. I just ordered 100 more about 2-3 weeks ago, as we're having a hard time replacing some of the ones that were damaged last spring. So we're at 1,100 there, and we just got 600 new iPads in for our K-2 students. That's the replacement cycle. This is a pre-COVID plan, so this was a plan that we already had in place prior to the pandemic.
And you all have seen this when we first started talking about whether or not we were going to go to put a question on the ballot. As you know, this would raise about $500,000 in additional revenue for the district if it passes. And this graph simply shows, if you look at the gold bar, what our projected expenditures for technology will be over the next few years. I did not add an inflationary factor to these expenses. So this is the devices themselves, the software licenses, the network, firewall expenditures, the salaries and benefits of our technology staff to keep all of these things in good working order. So those expenditure lines are all in excess of $1 million.
So we don't know what the future is going to look like. You know, they're saying maybe as much as a $5 billion shortfall from the next biennium with the state. When we have had a shortfall historically, as a superintendent, and you could kind of see the graphs there a little bit, what Jennifer was showing you in the two graphs towards the beginning of the presentation. The state typically doesn't cut from education. That's just not something that they do. But they freeze and they shift. So essentially what a shift does is this, and the last one we had was probably around 2012. So if in a typical year we get 100% of our dollars, they will say, well, we need to balance our budget at the state level, so we're not going to give you 100% of your dollars. We're going to give you maybe 70% of your dollars. And then we're going to give you something called an aid anticipation certificate, which you can take to a lender, and you can take out loans for the other 30% of the dollars. And if districts don't have healthy fund balances, they have to take out much higher loans because they don't have a balance to dip into when the state makes adjustments like this. So the last time we did this, I think we had a pretty healthy fund balance then too. But I think we paid somewhere around $70,000 in interest for that aid anticipation certificate for the year, which is really a good quality teacher in this district. So that's what happens typically. That's what most people are projecting the state will do if they have to make a budget shortfall. In a worst case scenario, or in a best case scenario in this situation, I would like to see them, okay, we're going to do the shift, but we're also going to add to the formula. That would be a good thing, because then we'd still know we'd be catching up. And so then when the economy gets better again, then the district or the state, the shift gets smaller and smaller until they're paying you your full amount on an annual basis. That's kind of how they dig out of the hole that when there's an economic shortfall that takes place. And we fully expect something like that will come forward, as they have done that historically in the past. The other piece of this is we don't know how long COVID's going to last and how long we're going to be in this model where we're doing significant distance learning. And as I stated, you know, I think 4 years is a good term for our Chromebooks on average. But I think the wear and tear on of them being used daily is going to reduce the life expectancy of those. And then bottom line is we're not going to be able to maintain this plan without assistance from the taxpayers or cuts elsewhere if this referendum doesn't pass sometime either this fall or the following. So here's what the question looks like. I don't know if you can make that a little bit bigger, Ashley. So it's basically replacing a referendum amount of $573 per pupil and authorizing a new amount of $714 per pupil. And it's also tied, like our current one is, to the rate of inflation. So if inflation goes up 2%, this would go up 2% on an annual basis. Or if inflation is flat, this stays at the level it's at. And of course, the language on there, by voting yes for this on the ballot question, you are voting for a property tax increase. So the financial impact on taxpayers, you go ahead and talk through this chart, Jennifer.
Sure. Well, again, you guys have seen this. By adding that additional 141,000, as I mentioned earlier, that would bring in about $500,000 more in revenue. The tax impact on a $100,000 house, which is what the county tells us is the average home value, would be $3 a month or $36 a year. Ag land, unlike a building bond, this is a levy for learning, and it does not impact ag land except for the value of 1 acre, the house and garage. So there's no tax impact on the additional agricultural acres.
So what are your questions?
Go ahead, Neil.
I'm thinking that there are financial advantages for our district if we do pass this year rather than next year. Care to comment on that?
Well, we'll get it a year earlier. We would get the additional $500,000.
But the current levy doesn't expire until 22. But I'm thinking that it would be to our financial advantage if we passed it this year rather than next year.
Well, it's to our advantage. We don't know what the future is going to look like. And so we don't know what the markets are going to be. We don't know. We have no idea how yeah, so I think it is to our advantage. We have more finite information on where the future is right now than we do, you know.
Would the cost of living go into effect 1 year earlier then?
It's on the current one we have right now, so that would remain steady.
Dennis?
As you've given the presentations, comments either positive or concerns with it? Has it been pretty upbeat?
The biggest concern I hear from talking to people is you got to get out and talk to more people because they don't understand it. That seems to be the biggest feedback that we're getting. You know,
We haven't really heard any opposition.
No, there's no formal group saying don't do it, but there's no formal group really saying do it either. So, you know, I think it's just, and so I think just continue to try and get the word out and educate the populace as much as we can.
Ken?
Is it worth, you know, we'll get some help from the paper informing the people, but you know, in times like this, you've got to look for other ways to try to get that information out. Is it worth having a night on state radio or doing some other things so we can get the word out and people can educate in the city?
Yeah, we have a radio program in the district that we have every Friday morning. Did you speak last week, Jennifer?
Yeah, I spoke about this
Yep.
last
So,
Friday.
so I think we're using every medium available to us. I think Channel 10 is coming tomorrow to interview one of us regarding the referendum. Social media, we've got things out there. We've created a small video that we've put on social media, then we have on the district website that there's a web page. The challenge is, really, this is fascinating. We have 10,000 people in Freeborn County who are signed up for early voting, 10,000. And so the ballots for the townships went out today, and just really getting that information. We got mailings we've done as far as informational, but just providing the information to folks before they vote is a real, it's a challenge.
Kim?
So we do have an opportunity. Beth Isaacson and myself are kind of leading in charge. working with ALEA to have a phone bank night, have phone bank nights. So we're working on the details, but it would be like, the challenge though is, of course, that absentees, and some people have already voted already, but
Right.
it doesn't, we know in our last referendum this really helped. And the Lead Minnesota has indicated that,
As an individual board, individual people away from the meeting can,
Yeah,
the
I'm
board
just-
cannot support what
I'm just
Kim
giving
is talking
knowledge.
about.
I'm
She's
just
talking
giving
about an
knowledge.
organized group out there
Yeah.
within the community, yeah.
Yeah, because we, you know, of course, we're here to give the information out, not to direct people necessarily which way to go. So that's the feeling. So I'm basically putting out there for the community and for board members, if it's something you want to help with, let Beth or myself know, and we'll get you hooked up. And ALEA, or the teachers union, is coming down and supplying, like they did before, the phones and the laptops, the script, the flyer, all of that. So that's not done, you know, by individual board members and things. Okay. I'm just organizing the volunteer base.
So we thought this is the common message that we're providing to the different groups so if people have questions, so now you have an idea what we're talking to people about.
Thank you for that information, because again, it is, you know, when you're voting one out and to replace with another one, it gets confusing to a number of people. Thank you. Okay, that brings us to number 4, which is a closed session. Pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13D03, Labor Negotiations, I need a vote to go into closed session.
So move.
Oh, sorry, in a second? Second, okay. Any other discussion? Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Pose the same? Aye. Okay. Motion carries, closed session.